In the shadows of world empires, behind revolutions, wars, and rising governments, there exists a name whispered with reverence, suspicion, and power: the Rothschilds. For over 2 centuries, the Rothschild family has been at the center of countless financial revolutions. Some call them visionaries. Others call them puppet masters pulling the strings of the world. But who really are they? How did a single family of Jewish bankers rise from obscurity in 18th-century Europe to allegedly shaping the fate of nations? This isn't just a story about wealth. It's a story about influence, about how money moves the world, and about how one family may have moved that money further, faster, and more discreetly than anyone else in history. It all begins in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt with a man named Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Born in 1744, Mayer wasn't a king. He wasn't even a nobleman. He was a coin dealer, one of many in a ghetto walled off from the rest of the city. But Mayer had something more valuable than coin: ambition, and a vision that would stretch far beyond the walls that confined him. He cultivated relationships with nobility, understanding that true wealth wasn't just about owning money, but about lending it to those who ruled. By the late 1700s, Mayer had become the official banker of Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, one of the richest men in Europe. But Mayer wasn't working alone. He had 5 sons, and he had a plan. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was no ordinary banker. He was a strategist, a man who saw opportunity in stability but also in chaos. In a world defined by kingdoms and war, he realized something few dared to consider: control the flow of money, and you control the outcome of history. So he sent his 5 sons across Europe like generals of finance, to the key financial capitals of the era. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Salomon went to Vienna. Nathan went to London. Karl settled in Naples. And James, the youngest, set up in Paris. This wasn't just family expansion, it was the foundation of a banking empire. A private communication and intelligence network more efficient than any monarch's. While kings relied on messengers and pigeons, the Rothschilds had couriers and coded letters crisscrossing Europe daily. And then came the Napoleonic Wars. While Europe burned, the Rothschilds thrived, financing war and peace on both sides. Nathan Rothschild, operating from London, became a legend. When Britain needed funds to fight Napoleon, he provided them. In secret, using vast networks of couriers, ships, and agents to transport gold across borders, bypassing enemy lines. But here's the twist most history books skip. It wasn't just about financing governments. It was about leveraging information. Nathan famously received early intelligence about the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo before the British government. And what did he do with this head start? He went to the London Stock Exchange and made a move that would echo through financial history. It was June of 1815. The fate of Europe hung in the balance at a place called Waterloo. Napoleon had returned from exile and once again thrown the continent into chaos. The Duke of Wellington faced him in a battle that could end an empire or resurrect one. But in London, one man already knew the outcome: Nathan Mayer Rothschild. Nathan had an unrivaled intelligence network, faster than any government. His agents on the continent had witnessed the French defeat, and a courier raced across the channel to deliver the news. Hours, even a full day, before the British cabinet would hear it. But Nathan didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He walked quietly into the London Stock Exchange and began to sell. One of the wealthiest men in Europe was dumping British government bonds. To everyone watching, it could mean only one thing: Britain had lost. Panic spread like fire through the floor. Investors scrambled to sell. Prices plummeted. And just when chaos reached its peak, Rothschild's agents, stationed across the room, began to buy. Pennies on the pound. When the truth came out the next day, that Napoleon had been defeated, British markets exploded upward. And Nathan Rothschild? He had just executed one of the most brilliant, controversial, and whispered about financial moves in history. Some historians argue this single event multiplied the Rothschild fortune exponentially. Others say it's a myth, a conspiracy whispered in shadow. But here's the chilling truth. No matter how exaggerated the story may be, It cemented a perception that the Rothschilds didn't just react to history, they predicted it, they influenced it, some believed, they controlled it. And from that moment on, the Rothschilds were no longer just bankers. They were architects of power. As the 19th century unfolded, the Rothschilds were no longer operating in shadows. They were now the kings behind kings. Their wealth wasn't just counted in gold. It was measured in influence. Each son had become a titan in his own city, embedded in the financial bloodstream of Europe. But they weren't just lending money to merchants or noblemen anymore. They were now funding entire nations. Wars, railroads, canals, governments. From the Suez Canal in Egypt to the reconstruction of post-war Europe, Rothschild money was the silent fuel behind the world's greatest transformations. But this came with a price, not to them, to perception. You see, the Rothschilds weren't just financiers. They were Jewish financiers. In a Europe rife with anti-Semitic undercurrents, their success stoked resentment and fear. Whispers turned to rumors, rumors turned to legends, legends into conspiracy. They were accused of controlling entire governments, manipulating economies, even orchestrating wars to profit from both sides. Was it true? Or was it fear of a family who had done what few others could, become more powerful than kings, without ever wearing a crown? In Vienna, Salomon Rothschild famously financed the Austrian Empire's railways. In Paris, James became the richest man in France, lending to kings and building France's first nationwide banking system. In London, Nathan's descendants helped establish institutions that still stand today, including the Bank of England and partnerships with the Vatican and global monarchies. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschilds were no longer individuals, they were an institution. But with influence this vast, came secrecy. They avoided the spotlight. No portraits in newspapers, no interviews, no boasts, just silence and shadows. And to this day, that silence is what fuels the most dangerous question of all. What don't we know about the Rothschilds? By the dawn of the 20th century, the world was changing fast. Old monarchies were falling. Industrialization was reshaping nations. The world was no longer ruled by kings and queens, but by corporations, oil, and money. And once again, the Rothschilds were there in the center of it all. In the early 1900s, a new commodity had surpassed gold: oil. It wasn't just the lifeblood of machines. It was the fuel for war, industry, and global dominance. And while names like Rockefeller and Carnegie dominated American headlines, the Rothschilds had already made their move decades earlier, establishing a stronghold in Baku, in modern-day Azerbaijan. They partnered with the Nobel family and challenged Rockefeller's Standard Oil in what would become one of the first global oil rivalries in history. They weren't just financing the oil business, they were controlling the infrastructure, the distribution, and the politics behind it. And behind the scenes, the Rothschilds continued to fund nations, including both sides of major conflicts: Britain, France, even the Ottoman Empire at times. This gave rise to a question that echoes to this day. If you can fund both sides of a war, do you control the outcome? It was this perception, power without borders, influence without accountability, that transformed the Rothschild name into something more than a family. It became a mythos, a symbol of hidden power. And nowhere did this echo louder than in the creation of central banks. Though the Rothschilds were European, conspiracy theorists would eventually link them to the founding of the U.S. Federal Reserve, America's private central bank, citing their historic influence over European banking as proof of a deeper, global reach. Were they truly involved? Officially, no. But unofficially, the fingerprints of Rothschild-influenced banking philosophy are found in the very architecture of modern global finance. The Rothschilds were no longer writing checks to kings. They were now lending to governments and guiding the systems those governments depended on. The 20th century was not only the age of empire and oil, it was the age of a long-awaited return. Zionism, the movement calling for a Jewish homeland, was gaining momentum. Across Europe, Jewish communities faced rising persecution, pogroms, and discrimination. And in the middle of it all stood a family with the means to shape destiny: the Rothschilds. It was Edmund de Rothschild, the father of the Yishuv, who quietly funded Jewish settlements in what was then Ottoman-controlled Palestine. He didn't just donate money. He built infrastructure, farms, schools, roads, and entire communities. He believed in a Jewish homeland, but not for power. He believed in preservation of faith, of identity, of survival. By the early 20th century, more than 40 Jewish agricultural colonies existed in the region, most funded directly by Rothschild capital. But then came World War I and the Balfour Declaration. This one-page letter would alter the course of history. His Majesty's government view would favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. It was addressed not to Edmund, but to Lord Walter Rothschild, a British zoologist and member of the family's English branch. Though Walter had no political power himself, the declaration carried symbolic weight, and, to many, it confirmed what conspiracy theorists had long whispered, that the Rothschilds weren't just financing history, they were engineering it. But the truth, as always, is more complicated. The Rothschilds were never a unified political force. In fact, many within the family disagreed about Zionism. Some feared it would bring danger. Others saw it as a moral obligation. Yet the narrative was too tempting, too convenient, for those looking to assign blame or build an enemy in the shadows. After the war, Edmund's legacy was etched in stone. His remains were even reinterred in Israel. To this day, Rothschild Boulevard runs through the heart of Tel Aviv. But with every monument came a darker echo. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. From far-right extremists to fringe corners of the internet, the Rothschild name became a symbol, not of philanthropy or heritage, but of alleged global manipulation. And thus, a family that once funded peace became branded as architects of control. In the age of empires, the Rothschilds were powerful. In the age of finance, they were wealthy. But in the age of the internet, they became immortal legends, for better or worse. As global systems grew more complex and inequality widened, people searched for something or someone to blame. The Rothschild name, already steeped in wealth and secrecy, became a lightning rod. They were accused of controlling the World Bank, the IMF, the Federal Reserve, every war since Napoleon, even weather manipulation via HARP and chemtrails. Yet, in truth, the modern Rothschild family no longer holds the power it once did. Yes, they are still wealthy. Yes, they still influence finance and investment. But the family is now fragmented, with dozens of heirs, separate holdings, and diminished centralized control. Gone are the days when they financed wars. Today, their power lies more in legacy than in leverage. Still, the myth remains more powerful than the man. In forums, books, videos, and fringe circles, the Rothschilds are painted as the architects of every global crisis. Not because there's proof, but because they fit the mold. They are wealthy, they are private, they are Jewish, and they've been around for centuries. The myth of the Rothschilds gives people something simple to believe in, a villain hiding in plain sight. But like all myths, it says more about us than it does about them. Because for every wild theory, there are also millions donated, forests preserved, historical art saved, cultural foundations supported around the globe. But that part doesn't go viral. Power, it has many faces. Sometimes it wears a crown, sometimes it holds a weapon, and sometimes it hides in a name, the Rothschild name. For over 2 centuries, this single family has been called many things: the kings behind the throne, the masters of money, the shadow government, the creators of chaos. But how much of it is actually true? Today, the Rothschild family is a shadow of what it once was. Still wealthy, yes, still influential in private banking circles, but a far cry from the force that once moved nations. They've sold off major assets. Their banks are now just one among many, and their descendants live scattered lives. Some in finance, others in philanthropy, conservation, and even quiet anonymity. They no longer dictate wars. They don't write laws. They don't own the world's central banks. But the myth remains, because a powerful myth doesn't need facts. It just needs fear, and fear travels faster than truth. And so, The Rothschild name has become the ultimate scapegoat, the eternal enemy in stories told by those desperate for order in a world that feels increasingly out of control. Economic collapse? Must be the Rothschilds. A pandemic? The Rothschilds planned it. Climate change? They're behind it too. This is not history. It's mythology. A modern legend dressed in suspicion and shadows. So why does it persist? Because when people feel powerless, they look for someone to blame. Someone invisible. Someone rich. Someone ancient. And the Rothschilds, with their mystery, their money, their Jewish heritage, and their history, fit the role all too perfectly. Let's be clear. Many of the wildest claims surrounding the Rothschilds are not only false, they are rooted in deep anti-Semitic tropes that have existed for centuries. The idea of a global cabal of chosen manipulators is not just misinformation. It's dangerous fiction, a fiction that has led to violence, hate, and division. And yet, the irony? The real Rothschild story, the true history, is already remarkable enough. This was a family that rose from a Jewish ghetto in Frankfurt to the highest halls of European power, not through conspiracy, but through calculated brilliance, risk, strategy, and trust. They were advisors, financiers, visionaries. They built the very systems our modern economies rely on. That's not fiction. That's fact. And perhaps that's what makes the myth so irresistible. Because it's easier to believe they stole power than to believe they earned it in a world that wasn't built for them. So maybe the question isn't, did the Rothschilds secretly rule the world? Maybe the real question is, why do we need to believe they did? Because if we can blame one name, we don't have to look at the systems. We don't have to examine the inequality. We don't have to ask what we're allowing to happen every single day. The myth is comforting, but the truth is far more complex and far more important to understand. The most dangerous stories are the ones we need to be true. If this story made you think, if it challenged what you've heard or confirmed what you suspected, then it's time to dive deeper. Subscribe to Empire Mindset for more eye-opening documentaries. Like this video to support content that dares to go beyond the surface. Comment below, what do you believe is the Rothschild power myth or reality? And remember, the truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth chasing.